Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at ClearEdge for our second, number two, live streaming event. Thank you again for coming. I am Tom Kolish, the Chief Architect here at ClearEdge. To my left is Tina Coleman, the Technical Director at ClearEdge, specifically in the cyber realm. Here, we're doing it again. So we have a couple good talks for you guys. Let me give you a brief introduction of ClearEdge. I know most of you who are attending this probably know who we are, but we are a woman-owned small business defense contractor located in Annapolis Junction. Our core competencies are data analytics, data science, large-scale distributed systems such as Hadoop or Kubernetes, and visualizations that help you see a lot of that data. We do this across a large set of domains such as intel, cyber, open source, geospatial, just to name a few for our both government and commercial clients. So I'm going to hand it over to Tina to talk about some of tonight's talks.
All right. So tonight we're going to hear from two speakers. This is our second event. Each event we've chosen a theme to structure our talks around. This evening's event is DevOps, and you're going to hear from a speaker who's going to talk with us about infrastructure as code, and another one who's going to talk with us about Rancher. Now, I will give a more in-depth intro to each talk in a moment. What I want to draw your attention to is you do have a chat window to the right, usually in your browser. Our speakers are going to be online to answer questions. So if something comes to mind, they raise a point, or there's something you'd like them to clarify or give an example for, we do encourage you to ask those questions, and they are ready and waiting for those to come through. So the reason we do this is both to help highlight our excellent engineers and give them a chance to sort of strut their stuff, and you'll see that in action this evening, but also to give you an idea of who you might be working with were you to apply for some of the positions we have open at ClearEdge. If you hit up our ClearEdgeIT.com, our careers page, you'll currently find positions related to system reliability engineering, systems engineering, system administration across both our cyber domain and our intelligence domain. And so we would encourage you to go and take a look and see if what you see speaks to what you're already doing, you're interested in exploring.
Sounds good.
All right. Let's see. We are now interested in giving you an idea of what you can win as we recognize you're giving of your time this evening. We're hoping we're giving you something interesting to listen to and learn about. But to sweeten the deal a little bit, we do have a drawing for the evening. So given our theme, we have two books from which you can choose. One is The Unicorn Project. For those of you who have been interested in DevOps, this probably has been on your hot list to read if you haven't already read it. In fact, our Women in Technology group is working through this in our book club at this moment and having some great discussions. If you've already read it, or if this author isn't your style, we also have the Operations Anti-Patterns DevOps Solutions book, sort of a mock-up. It's not yet available off the shelf, so we know you haven't read it yet, at least in hard copy form. We wanted to give you another eye. So we will be picking names throughout the evening, and you'll get your choice of either of the two books. Alrighty, so the first speaker that we're going to see this evening is Mr. Brian Rocco. He is a technical leader here for us within ClearEdge, specializing in distributed computing platforms and solving big data problems. He's been with ClearEdge for over 11 years now, where he enjoys continuous learning and sharing his knowledge through mentoring, collaboration, and giving presentations like this one. So his talk this afternoon or this evening is Pets versus Cattle, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say.
Hey there. My name is Brian Rocco, and today I'm here to talk to you about pets versus cattle. A little bit about me. I'm a senior software engineer with ClearEdge. I did my undergrad at UMBC, proud alum. It's been a minute. And so far in my career, I've been focused on all things distributed computing. So big data, data analytics, data visualization, data science, high performance compute, machine learning, natural language processing, Kubernetes, Docker, anything containerization, DevOps, full stack development, and I fix printers now and then. So I want to start off by throwing out a little hypothetical scenario that might sound familiar, maybe even a little too familiar and close to home. So imagine you've just joined a new project or team and you're looking to help out with the infrastructure. So you get there and meet with the team lead, Scooby, who begins describing the project and the first tasking for you to take on, saying, "Hey there, I'm hoping you can take a look at our chat server. I think we need to rebuild it." Rodney wrote up step-by-step instructions in our wiki for how to install the chat server software. It's called Mattermost. So just follow that exactly, make zero mistakes, assume we didn't leave anything out, and interpret every step precisely as he intended, and the server will turn out exactly the same. Well, pretty much. Oh, but wait, we did have to make a few changes since then because something else broke after the last OS update. Well, technically, Sophia made those changes, but now she's gone. She wrote what she did in that Jira ticket way back when, though. Or maybe it was on that Confluence page she always added to. I don't remember what she did to fix it, but it was definitely complicated. Oh, sweet, I found the Jira ticket. But I'm not sure what this means here. Tell you what, maybe you can just make a tarball of the current installation on our production chat server and copy that to a new server. But maybe there's config somewhere else? Definitely make a snapshot of this VM and keep it for a while, in case we can't make a new one right away or if it breaks later. I'll tell you what, how about this? Why don't you manually build a new server and call it Chat Server New, then follow Rodney's step-by-step wiki guide for Mattermost. Then read through what Sophia changed and figure out how to do that again. Then copy over the config from the current prod chat server and try it out on your new one. But go through the config and make sure you change host names and whatever else so we don't break prod in the process. And be careful not to change or delete anything on that prod server while you're in there. And if you end up doing anything differently than Rodney or Sophia did, then just update that wiki page or add a new one or put in the Jira ticket or whatever. Sound good? Yikes. Well, if any of that sounded familiar, welcome to the family, my friends. You are not alone. In either case, let's unpack some of the issues from that. Admitting we have a problem is the first step, or so my friends tell me at least. Anyway, we all know these pain points all too well. The fact that we have to perform manual steps to build that server. The fact that it wouldn't be easy or quick to rebuild if something goes wrong, creating high stakes for anyone touching it. The circumstance where all of the config changes just exist on that server and nowhere else. And all of those adding up makes it hard to ensure consistency. How do I know if when I need to rebuild that chat server that it's going to match the current production one? We don't have an easy way to test changes before implementing them. For all of these reasons, we now need to be careful with updates too. And of course, the fact that so much domain knowledge is required that shouldn't need to be. Yeah, it's good for me to know that Sophia made changes to fix an issue at one point, but I shouldn't need to know every detail and need to manually repeat her work step by step to build the chat server. So now that we've gone through all the doom and gloom, where's the light at the end of this tunnel, right? Yeah, we hit these problems all the time, but how can we do better? Can we do better? And the answer, of course, is yes. And to me, the key is doing some work up front to make our lives easier later. Ever back into a parking spot? Delayed gratification, my friends. So now that we've run through all those specific issues we hit, let's take a step back. Because really, all of those low-level problems we ran into were symptoms of our approach itself. And for this talk, I want to focus on one particular big picture concept to help avoid hitting problems like those in the first place. And that concept just so happens to be the title of this talk. And in case you forgot somewhere along the way so far, that concept is pets versus cattle. Yep, it's one of those tech analogies we all love so much. And okay, I know my audience, So at least one of you is already thinking, but Brian, what if I have a pet cow? Which is it, huh? Pet or cattle? Huh? Huh? Ooh, got him. Oh, you clever engineer, you. I see what you did there. But actually, let's follow that thread. So maybe you do have a pet cow named Bessie, who loves to play with you out in the backyard, eats dinner at your kitchen table, and cuddles with you at night. You love her dearly, and life loses meaning when you're apart. If so, that's adorable. Bessie needs a YouTube channel, and please send me the link once she's up and running. But while Bessie is a cow, more importantly, for this analogy, Bessie is a pet. Let me clarify. First off, she has a name, Bessie, and that name means something and makes her special, different from all those other not Bessie cows. Second, what would happen if Bessie got really sick one day, stopped letting you cuddle her, and you had to put her down? Now, Bessie is fine, because she's completely hypothetical, so don't worry. But the point is that you would care if she died, or if she were replaced with a different cow. You see where I'm going with this? This is actually the key to the analogy of pets versus cattle, the concept it presents, and the goal it challenges us to achieve. So for the sake of this talk, let's assume you see cattle as the opposite of Bessie. You see cattle as a herd of unnamed, interchangeable milk factories of no individual significance whatsoever. And you see Bessie as your unique pet cow, not part of some herd of numbered cattle. We want our servers to be interchangeable cattle, easy to build up, easy to tear down, easy to upgrade. We want to be confident that at any time we can rebuild that chat server exactly as it is now with minimal effort, minimal downtime, and no impactful difference between old and new. And all without reading any Jira ticket or wiki page to do it, and wondering whether we got it right after the fact. The key technical point here is that we want to get ourselves out of the business of treating all of our servers like our pets, and more into a mindset of treating the vast majority of them like cattle, where they're provisioned using some automated process and failure tolerant by design, ready to be traded in and out at any time. So maybe, instead of chat server running Mattermost, milkserv 80 is running Mattermost. And if milkserv 80 goes down, milkserv 81 then gets used to run Mattermost for us instead. We don't necessarily even care which particular server is doing the work as long as it's getting done. One goes down, gets pulled out, spin up a new one, and on we go. That's cattle, and that's the dream. So back to that chat server. You can probably see now that we'd been treating that chat server as a pet. We had Mattermost running on a server named chat server that we log into and carefully tend to as things go wrong and tiptoe around to keep it running. Yep, definitely a pet. The goal is to reach a point where we're focused on the application that we're running rather than the server that it's running on. So maybe Mattermost is running on some server among a bunch of numbered servers. And we don't care what its number is, as long as we can get to it. And that's the ultimate goal. So how do we get there? Now, there are plenty of theories, guides, and technologies out there we can apply to start utilizing our servers as cattle. I'm going to focus on the core principles and common approaches while touching on a handful of specific tools out there along the way. My goal is to leave you today with enough understanding of the overarching concepts and best practices that you'll be able to seek out and jump into some tutorials relevant to your particular infrastructure setup, whether it be bare metal, VMware, AWS, or whatever the latest cloud hotness is. Kind of like a choose your own adventure for DevOps. All right, let's jump in. The first key component of cattle is automating server setup. Because the only way we're going to get out of a manually built pet server is by not manually building that server. So rather than someone spinning up a server from a vanilla OS image and doing a bunch of manual steps, or maybe even starting from a gold image and manually just making minor changes, we automate that entire process of building out the server, from installing the OS to installing our software, to configuring everything and any other changes in between. We're trading the cost of manually building machines over and over with the cost of maintaining the automated process to do it for us. It's ideal for servers, shared workstations, and really anything shared or managed over time that isn't perpetually changing. And once we have our automated setup process with all that code and configuration, we can take it a step further with infrastructure as code. Yes, it's a tech buzzword, and if you're wondering whether it has one of those 3-letter abbreviations with mixed case, you bet it does. Big I, little a, uppercase C. But really, as is the case with most tech jargon, it's not so much about knowing the buzzword as it is about just doing the thing. In a nutshell, infrastructure as code is about capturing the process of building your infrastructure in code, so you can then use that code to build out your infrastructure. I realize that's kind of the inverse back and forth, but in other words, instead of building out infrastructure and then capturing the config in a repo or docs, it's about letting the code itself drive the creation of that infrastructure instead of the reverse. So, assuming we've previously automated the setup process of the OS and the software we need, the idea here is that now we will take it to the next step further, to where we can eliminate even the initial server instance creation itself. So rather than the usual step 1, go to the VM cloud management interface and click through to create a new instance, you can actually define all of that in code, along with how many vCPUs, how much RAM, how much disk to allocate, and what the network topology looks like. All of that can be defined in code. And that code can be kicked off without any point in clicking or SSHing in to run shell commands on a new server, to the point where you can have an entire end-to-end provisioning process all based in code, hence infrastructure as code. Another thing to point out here is even switches and firewalls and other discrete or purpose-built devices can benefit from this. Rather than someone going in manually to tweak some settings in a firewall without a lot of confidence, it could all be driven by code. If that firewall device dies today, you could immediately swap it out with a spare, push the exact same config, and be up and running. So one big tool to mention here is Terraform. It seeks to help you establish infrastructure as code by design. It's kind of its whole purpose. Now, as a Terraform fanboy myself, I'm definitely biased, but there are also plenty of other good tools out there too to help you get the job done just as well. Lastly, taking it to the next step further is containerization. And that's where we can get into a mode where we're focused on the application itself rather than the server that it's running on. So, thinking back to that Mattermost chat server, rather than provisioning an entire single-purpose server just to run Mattermost, we can use a Mattermost container instead. Then, we simply automate spinning up and configuring the Mattermost container as our entire provisioning process. And if we can deploy that container to Kubernetes or another distributed container orchestration system, it gets even better. We then get fault tolerance, load balancing, scaling, and tons of other goodies for free, all without worrying about the underlying server at all. At that point, the servers have truly become cattle, as we're simply provisioning and maintaining near identical worker nodes in the underlying cluster, which allows us to run a variety of applications on top of them. The key distinction and advantage here is separating the application management from the server management, providing simpler provisioning and maintenance processes for both the applications being deployed as well as the servers they're being deployed onto. It's really win-win all around. So going back, I wanted to list out on one slide for you some specific tools I've used and liked over the years as part of treating servers more like cattle and less like pets. Some I've already mentioned, some I haven't. Terraform, infrastructure as code, Ansible, automated setup and automated provisioning, GitLab, version control, CI/CD, and other add-ons to help you along the way. Jenkins, another CI/CD tool primarily. Docker for running containers, and Kubernetes for orchestration of those containers. So I know this has been a lot. If I had to sum it all up, I would say work smart, not hard. That's what it's all about. Spend the time up front to automate what you can, to spend less time later, over and over, tending to a bunch of pet servers. Keep that cattle over pets mindset and go automate some stuff. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Brian. I've had the pleasure of working with Brian on a project and gotten to see these tools in action. I can think of multiple projects here where we're using these things today, so I very much appreciated Brian's walkthrough of these, and particularly his mention of Bessie. That's not a name he actually used on the project before, but one that I will have to harass him about in the future. I see that we've had a question come up in the chat. Amy asks, as a developer, what is the hardest or maybe most time-consuming part of transitioning from a pets mentality to a cattle one with a normal application? We'll give Brian a chance or a second or two to think about that and give an answer. I'm interested in what he has to say here.
I kind of am too. What has Brian have trouble with? What he thought was the hardest issue? That's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, I know he's had a lot of experience doing these things.
He has.
It would be interesting to see what he comes up with on this. But if anybody else has any other questions, feel free to jump in and ask some more. So.
We will happily put Brian on the spot to answer.
I do love to do that. So, speaking of that, okay. Well, not really speaking of that, but
Brian's answering.
Look at Brian, working hard.
He is.
All right, so before we jump into the next speaker, I was actually thinking we could do a little bit of a halftime show here. A little different from episode 1.
I didn't play football, I played rugby, and they do have a halftime.
Hopefully they have a halftime.
They do.
They have orange slices.
Oh, yeah.
And then it's good. So
No
I played
commercials.
as a soccer player, so and we had lots of orange slices. Yeah. So our halftime show, actually, we're going to talk about KubeCon 2020. Virtual version. That's going on actually right now. So definitely go, if you can get in there now, go check it out. So it kicked off Tuesday. Yeah, Tuesday with several other co-located events. Co-located because I think they're pretty much all virtual.
Right.
Given the current climate, the Cloud Native Security Day and the Service Mesh Con, which I've dealt with some service meshes, and I know you probably have too as well. Sure. They do need their own conference. That is it's just a topic in itself. So right. I know from my experience so far, the KubeCon, I know all the sessions are made available for on-demand viewing too afterwards, so you can almost immediately just rewatch it if you missed it. If you're busy in your day, either working or watching your children who are at home virtually learning as well, you can virtually learn with them. Also, I know they're doing it looked like they were doing a Slack channel per thread.
They are doing a Slack channel per thread, right? Okay. So we get that chance to interact with the speakers and ask questions real time.
That's pretty cool. So no more waiting in line at the event, right in the long line, or walking up awkwardly to the mic to ask the question. So why is this important to ClearEdge and myself and Tina here? We have attended 3 KubeCons now. I would consider this one us attending it right now as we watch it. Yeah. Yes. So we've been to Seattle, Washington, and also San Diego, which San Diego was very nice. This year's was supposed to be in Boston.
Yes.
Nice and cold. So this might be better than being in Boston in November. But this is also important for ClearEdge. The reason we were going is ClearEdge tries to stay or continues to strive to stay on the forefront of technology. If we look back on some of ClearEdge's history, early adopters of Hadoop, when that transition to the cloud started happening. So we were definitely early adopters, whether it was in the data space or the analytics space, working to make those migrations. Also, in the last couple of years, we've jumped on the Kubernetes train. I mean, watching Docker grow as a containerization engine, I think a lot of us who've run production clusters were wondering, how are you going to manage your 6,000 containers? So container orchestration also came up pretty well. So ClearEdge has offered, and we've done in person before COVID training sessions where we brought out Kubernetes experts, and they helped everyone step towards getting that CCAD certification. So
you've got a certification voucher to complete.
yeah,
right?
I do have a certification voucher I need to complete. You're just saying this because you've already done yours.
Yeah.
Exactly. So Tina, did you find any talks that were interesting that you've?
Yeah, they've got a couple of threads that, particularly for the customer that I'm serving now, really were the ones that I wanted to follow. One of the major themes was DevSecOps, so making sure that not only are you setting up your DevOps pipelines and doing some of the things that Brian spoke to in terms of safely, repeatably getting your applications out on the infrastructure, but then also building in the hooks to let us validate to our customers that we've done it in a way that meets their particular security norms. For the customers that we work with, that's a big deal. And so the more growth there is and the more knowledge shared in that area, the better. And then one of the other themes was GitOps, which fits into that very nicely. I have not yet caught there's a session coming up, everything you should be doing but aren't, DevSecOps for Kubernetes workflows, which is supposed to show a live demonstration of using some of the CNCF projects. There's a caboodle of them, but Helm, OPA, Falco, and Argo are all of interest to me as we try to figure out how to make sure that the containers that hit our clusters have been scanned, that they meet the policies that we need. I want to see all of that hooked together nicely and piggyback off of what they've been doing.
Yeah, I feel like security in the Kubernetes world is just starting to grow and expand in its operations and its knowledge too, just in general. And there's tools growing fast to help support this. So I know one that stood out to me was called scaling millions of models, ML models, to solve problems in the SRE and security realm. I think this is one's going tomorrow too. So I've bookmarked this to watch that. So and I've done some ML, large-scale distributed ML work in the past, and just in general, running large amounts of models over large amounts of data in itself is just an interesting problem. Seeing how Kubernetes could help do that efficiently.
Right.
And they use a whole bunch of tools. And this is from, I think, a company called Volterra, but they're using, I think, a bunch of open source tools like Kubernetes, Prometheus, Cortex, and a couple other ones that I've actually had some experience with, Spark, Apache Spark, and Arrow too. So to kind of build out this ecosystem to run all of these models over data and then provide security insights.
Sure.
So I thought that was actually pretty awesome. And then I know Rancher is going to be a big presence there as well. So.
They are. They're one of the, I believe, platinum sponsors. I did take a look to see what talks they were giving. Interestingly, they were only giving 2 talks.
Interesting.
And neither were what I was seeking, which had to do with what's coming out in the new versions of Rancher. What's the future when they've just been purchased by a European company, SUSE? I mean, what does that look like, particularly for us in our role as a contractor serving the government? Sometimes government agencies are a little sensitive about that, and I want to hear those answers of what they're looking to do there.
Maybe they're sitting on a whiteboard trying to figure it out, and they're like, we'll wait till the next KubeCon when there's not a pandemic.
Yeah, I've seen enough echoes to know that they have a strategy in mind. I just would like to hear it straight from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
I've always enjoyed any of Darren Shepard's talks, though. We got to hear one last year, I think, where he was talking about K3S and how they were rebuilding that to make it efficient and ready for the edge.
K3S was pretty awesome.
That was neat.
It was very neat. I mean, anybody who's built Kubernetes clusters in themselves, making it streamlined and a lot easier and smaller, and was pretty awesome.
Sure.
All right. Before we go to the next video, it looks like I'm getting something over the wire here. It looks like we might have a winner for our drawing here. So it looks like we have 2 winners. And don't worry, we will reach out to you via email. You don't need to like raise your hand or go through the chat window or anything. We will reach out to you to get your info and your book selection that you would like and how you would like that delivered, whether in the amazing hard copy or virtual. So we have the winner number 1 is Jeremy, and winner number 2 is Hans. Hopefully I'm saying Hans correctly and it's not something else. Yeah, so congratulations.
Congratulations to both of you.
Yeah, enjoy the books. We'll be doing another drawing at near the end of the live stream. So again, feel free to just put your name into that Google form. So, okay, I think it's probably time to go to our next talk. It was a good halftime show. You think so?
I think so. I think we're ready for our next speaker.
I think we're ready for the next speaker. Let's go to that. So. We're talking, the next speaker is Andrew. He has over 11 years of experience and has been with ClearEdge for over 2 years now in our IR&D space. He will be presenting on Rancher, so I had a little foreshadowing when I brought up the Rancher earlier. And as he set up a persistent instance here in our IRAD space, and also some lab instances to do some testing and playing with us for different corporate uses and research and development, and basically trying to test and play with Rancher. So he's going to do a little talk called Rancher Things We Like and Things We Don't. So go ahead, feel free to take it away, Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andrew Bishop. I'm an engineer at ClearEdge IT, and today I'm going to be telling you about Rancher. We'll give you some background context, some things I like, some things I don't like about, so that way you have some more information to see if it's something you want to try yourself or find out more about. To give you some sort of background, when we first started deploying back in the day, we would just deploy to bare metal, but that proved cumbersome, so then we made it into virtual machines that could be deployed a lot easier. The next iteration was containers, where you have just the apps running and the operating systems outside. So for that mostly is going to be Docker for Kubernetes that will take those containers and orchestrate them so that way you can manage them automatically. You can spawn up based off what your needs are, you can monitor and control those a lot easier. So it does a lot of those management tasks for you. So if you want to use Kubernetes, you could manage yourself, or you can use Rancher. Rancher is a platform that manages the Kubernetes clusters for you. So it will be able to create or manage your clusters. You can import existing clusters, or you can deploy to some cloud provider if you want. It's a central place to manage all of those different clusters for multiple different use cases if you want, and you can reuse features across all of them. So it's also free and open source, so that makes licensing and legal issues a lot easier to deal with. To give some context where Rancher come from, it was created by Rancher Labs back in 2014. This was before Kubernetes existed, so it was just focused on Docker and containers back then. So when time for 2.x to come out, Kubernetes had become a big thing, so they designed Rancher 2x to be Kubernetes based. So there's still that legacy of the Docker in there though, so you'll see where that comes into play a little bit later. If you want to set up yourself, it's pretty easy. You just need a box that has Docker already installed and at least 4 gigs of memory. So then you can run this one Docker command and pass in search if you want, and now it's up and running with TLS. So you can see here, it has a bunch of, this is the default what comes with. You can see a quick glance at your clusters. You can see how to create new ones, add ones, whole dashboard right there. It just works. So you saw how easy it was to do the Docker install, but if you want, there's a lot of other ways you can do. You can do a single node Kubernetes cluster or the high availability. So that way, if any one nodes go down, it still works fine, still just as good. You can even do it with an air-gapped install if you want to, or if you have some sort of restrictions. We were able to use Harbor and Helm to create a high availability air-gapped installation of Rancher on our lab. One thing of note though is if you do the air-gapped, you have to have all the images and dependencies in your registry. Rancher isn't that small. For us, it took 3.5 gigs just for the images and dependencies for Rancher itself, not counting any things we installed on top of that. So that might be fine, but just something to be aware of. Once it is up though, you can use it to create or import new clusters. This is one of the bulk of what it does, is managing those clusters for you. So you can see there's lots of options for cloud providers. If you want to just integrate with like Amazon or Google or Microsoft, they have all of that right in, or you can create your own from scratch, or even import an existing one. One thing though, if you are setting up those clusters, right now it does depend on Docker. So that is required. Some of the Linux operating systems like Red Hat 8 or CentOS 8 have switched their default container platform to like Docker, to Containerd or Podman. But you still can install Docker. It just may take time and effort to get all the dependencies and all of the things working for Docker for that OS. There is something coming down the road that they're working on called Rancher Government, which does use Containerd instead of Docker, so that's something that could work. I'll get a lot more on that later. To just kind of mention the other products by Rancher Labs, they have the RKE, which is Rancher. They have K3S, which is a much more slimmed down version of Kubernetes that can run on embedded devices or mobile devices. And then that Rancher Government, which is the RKE2. I'll get more on that in a bit, but just to give you that. So for back to Rancher, one of the other big advantages is it provides a very nice clean UI for managing things. If you're going to be using Kubernetes natively, you're going to be doing it in a command line. So you have to know all your commands, all your flags, and probably be running man and help for a lot of them until you get really familiar. But with Rancher, it's all drop downs, it's visual, you can see things at a glance a lot easier and be able to customize that a bit. For customization though, it's locked in with the options they provide. If you don't like those options, they do recommend potentially creating an Ember CLI add-on to extend it, but that's very complicated and might not even give you exactly what you want. So you do have this nice web UI, but you're kind of locked into what they provide you. You saw earlier the gauges, that comes by default, but also Rancher, there's a lot of integrations with third-party tools. Like you can see here, you can add in Grafana and Prometheus to expand your monitoring, expand your tools. Makes things a lot nicer to pull in all of those different tools. And the way you can do that is they come with the public Helm repository. They call it a catalog, where it has all of these Helm charts for you that you can configure and install onto your clusters. Right now, they have some multi-app or some multi-cluster apps, but that is deprecated. The way forward is what they call the continuous delivery, and I'll get more on that in a bit. But one thing that's nice about this catalog is if you do install apps through this catalog, it keeps track of them and lets you know when there are updates to them. So that makes things a lot easier to manage those. So what you've seen before for Rancher was their more classic UI, which is the cluster manager, starting in 2.4, but now more formalized in 2.5. They have what they call the cluster explorer. So it's a lot more visual, a lot more graphical with dashboards and tiles instead of necessarily forms and central dashboard. So you do get both with Rancher, and they are moving features around. So that's something to consider as you use it. Is if you don't see it as easily at one, you might want to just look in the other UI to see and make that work for you if that works easier. As part of the Cluster Explorer, instead of the catalog, they now have what they call their marketplace, which is all Helm 3 charts. So it does give you a little bit more integration with a particular cluster, but it's not a multi-cluster application anymore. One thing about Rancher, though, is it is built to be multi-tenant. So you could have many different users and complete discrete parts of the cluster, different management of those. So you can do role-based permissions. If you bring in users, you can just assign them a role and have those roles type permissions to individually permissioning all the different actions, what they can and can't do. As well as just what Kubernetes does, Rancher has a separate construct on top of that called projects, which do spawn multiple or can spawn multiple namespaces. You can do your research quotes at the project level, and you can also do that user role mappings at the project level instead of just a namespace or app level. So it does make it easier to permission for multiple different use cases. To bring in those users and permissions that you already have, you could just tie in with one of your existing authentication providers. We use Keycloak in the lab to do that, but there's a lot of options available. For Rancher as well, to tie more into these permissioning, they do have this UI for creating those fine-grained policies where you can enforce different restrictions on your clusters. So there's a lot of options, and they can get very fine-grained, so you probably want to look around to see what you need to do. With all these features though, as things change and update, they can be a pain. With 2.4, they introduced a bunch of features to help with the process. So like if you did a Helm install onto a Kubernetes cluster, like for high availability, there are Helm charts that would upgrade for you. Or if you did a Docker install, there are sidecar containers you can spin up while you upgrade and then resync afterwards. But if you're coming from anything 2.3 and older, you don't have any of those options. You're probably just going to do a new cluster and re-import your existing nodes and clusters into that. The other thing to consider is, as these upgrades happen, there are sometimes incompatibilities. So you might need to, like, say, install a new version of Kubernetes on all of your hosts to do that upgrade. There is documentation on that, but it's something, again, to keep in mind when you are upgrading. So I had mentioned if you're coming from an older one, just create a new one and re-importing them. One thing that you can do to make that easier is Rancher does have a backup recovery feature in. So what it does is it creates a snapshot of the etcd and control plane. So you can do it to local storage or S3, and you can do it either just ad hoc, or you can have it actually be a scheduled task to back up regularly. And as any good modern app does, it does have the option for both light and dark mode, so you can pick based off your preference, and it even has the option to change automatically based off time of day. One of the features that I found the most helpful, though, was it does come with its own DNS service. So that does spawn multiple clusters, and it will automatically pick up the new apps you deploy and connect it to the Kubernetes ingress controller, so that way it automatically handles a lot of networking headache for you, makes things a lot easier and a lot quicker spawning up and deploying apps to it. Speaking of deploying apps, what I mentioned earlier is that continuous delivery. You can tie Kubernetes install with Rancher to a Git repo. So that way when you're doing your CI/CD pipeline, it will help automatically deploy to this Kubernetes cluster using Rancher. So that makes things a lot easier to install those apps and control them between clusters with that little bit more configuration and logic. Rancher does come with some pretty nice documentation. It was pretty easy to read, and it did cover pretty much all of the use cases you would need. It has instructions for everything from how to spawn it up, how to manage it, best practices, so quite a lot. But it stays at a higher level. So if you need to know more what's going on under the hood, it's going to be a lot harder to find that. It's not necessarily in the documentation, and I had to find that on like Stack Overflow or user forums. So some of this troubleshooting could be trickier if it's not something that's a common use case or something in their documentation. So one thing that is nice about Rancher is, I've alluded to this earlier, but it does abstract a lot of ways. So you don't necessarily need to have a complete understanding of Kubernetes. It will give you drop downs so you can pick from the multiple choice instead of having to know the specific flag and command. It will have the tooltips and hover over to give you more information on what those actually mean. So it does make it a lot easier to spawn up, to just get going through your Kubernetes without having to understand all of what's going on. But because it does that, it does make learning some of those Kubernetes practices a little bit tougher. It will make decisions under the hood that you might not be aware of. To give you an example, it uses Nginx by default as the load balancer to send traffic to the service router, either through node port or host port. They do have documentation how to use node port and host port, but it doesn't tell you about the Nginx load balancer, or that there are other ways you can do. Like, for example, you could use traffic. It's just not mentioned anywhere in Rancher documentation. So if you knew Kubernetes and how that worked, you could change that to something different, but just using Rancher, you wouldn't necessarily know that you could. So I mentioned earlier that Rancher Government, or RK2, that's something that's a side project right now, but is going to eventually be merged with Rancher and be one product. So it was super easy to install. There's two components to it, the server and the agent. So I was able to install on a CentOS 8, which did not have Docker, just using Yum. So it took me just a couple minutes to install everything. And it runs without Docker, so you still can run it on ARM-based chips, so like mobile or embedded devices. It's a lot more lightweight in your containers, but it does not have that UI or all those tools. It's you configure it through system commands or some config file in etc directory that is very much something that requires privileged access to change or modify. And it is something that they are working on giving that feature parity, but there's no roadmap or timeline for when things will actually happen for that. Just that it will happen at some point. So in conclusion, Rancher does a lot for you. It makes it a lot quicker and easier to use Kubernetes and spawn up clusters and deploy to them. And it does so in a way that doesn't force you to know as much about what's going on. It will help let you be able to still get the deployment out there without having as much of a learning curve at first. If you do need to get to the very particulars, though, it could be more that you'd have to learn yourself. But that's one of the quirks and different bumps that Rancher has. Every single product seems to have some sort of trade-off or some sort of headache. So if those are ones that work for you, definitely consider using it. One thing though to remember though is I do expect a bunch of changes to happen both as they move from Cluster Manager to Cluster Explorer, as well as the integration of Arcade Government and changing from Docker to Containerd. So overall, I do recommend it, but again, there's some things to definitely take into account if you want to use it. Any questions?
Thanks, Andrew. That was a great talk. I've actually just even seeing how Rancher has grown over the last years and almost just changed everything. I remember 1.0 mainly using Docker and Cattle as its orchestration platform, and I mean it's useful. We used it multiple times for a lot of it for our CI/CD stuff actually on projects. So it was really kind of cool when in 2.0 they fully embraced the Kubernetes engine and just made a jump full switch. Definitely couldn't just upgrade anymore. It's a complete change of path there. The other thing is that I really like even their minor versions that they're upgrading are, as you could see from Andrew's talk, it's exceptional amount of more tooling and information and logging. It's just getting more and more better as an open source a platform. So feel free to add any questions in to the comments if you have. Andrew's standing by, waiting to answer them. And it looks like, oh yeah, Kashal back here. So let's see. He asked a question here. It says, do you think Rancher or KubeADM would be a good starting point for someone trying to learn Kubernetes deployments?
I've had the chance to use both of them. And I very much say it depends on whether you're trying to learn the guts. I'm interested to see what Andrew's thoughts here are.
I definitely am. I think the question is, and I wonder what Andrew's going to say here, and he'll probably respond shortly, is, are you a developer or an admin?
There is a reason that they have the certified Kubernetes application developer,
Yep.
and that's a set of skills, and the certified Kubernetes admin, and that's a set of skills. They've now even got a new cert for security specialists. So there's lots of things one can get into in the Kubernetes space.
It
So
does.
I see Andrew's answering.
Yep, already answering. So feel free if you have any more questions, go through and ask them. And that's actually two videos here. That's the end of our show here. Don't worry, I haven't forgot. We do have another drawing coming up, but I just, before we transition, I wanted to thank everyone for coming. If you have any questions, feel free to put them on here. This is being recorded as well, so it will be out on YouTube later. Yes, I know, you can come watch this again and again. And if you have any comments or questions, you can add it to that stream, to that recorded version as well. We'll take a look at that. So I think I'm gonna throw it over to Tina for the final drawing.
The final drawing, ooh, a little bit of drama here. So again, you get your pick of the Unicorn Project or the Operations Anti-Patterns DevOps Solutions book. We have 3 winners identified, and again, we'll give just their first name, and we will be emailing the winners to help them actually get connected with their copies. So, winner number 1, Grayson, you'll be having your choice of books. Winner number 2, Corey, also having your choice of books. And winner number 3, Alex. So I can't wait to hear what some of you think of some of these books. That would be fun fodder to have in the chat as well. So we mentioned this was our second one of these. There's you all have been great audiences in terms of giving us thumbs up. We'd love to have those on the feed. That helps our bosses think we're doing a good job. Yay. We are going to take a break for the month of December. For lots of folks, it's a busy month around various holidays, so we'll take a break there. And then actually in January, we're going to try something a little different. There's a local meetup group, DataWorks MD, that ClearEdge has a good relationship with. They do some great technical talks, and so we've offered to give a technical talk as part of their meetup group. They also stream their events out, so we'll make visible how you log into that event and do the same sort of thing. That talk is slated for it's January 16th, which is, I believe, a Saturday. I should know this. The speech title, rough title at the moment, is called Malware Detection Enabled by Machine Learning, and it focuses on the things ClearEdge and its iRed team in particular are doing as we stitch together an end-to-end, at least proof of a solution of how one can take advantage of machine learning to actually recognize malware as it's coming through some sort of intrusion detection or intrusion prevention system. So look for that coming up, and I'm sure we'll have ways visible to connect you through that. All right.
I think that's it. So
That's it.
yeah, so everybody enjoy your Thanksgiving. Deep fry that turkey. Yeah. You really have big deep fryers that you just buy and you just throw the turkey. Yeah.
There's always fire reports every year.
That's very true. So thank you everyone for coming. I always say stay classy, Jessup, Maryland.
No, classy.